final question. These failed elites, the financial and political elites, actually created a myriad of complex financial regulations, especially in Europe and the United States, to prevent what's happened from happening. The tougher rules didn't work, and there's little confidence they can fix things up now.
Well, the failure of the financial regulatory system and its failure to clear it up is not the cause, it's the symptom. No regulatory system works if it is not enforced. No reform is meaningful if it's not going to be enforced. The crisis is the perception, not that there was not regulation, but that no one enforced the regulation. The crisis is not that the new regulations not emerging, it's that they won't be enforced anyway. I'll put it this way. This is a crisis in virtue. In the virtue of the political leadership, in the virtue of the financial leaders, there's expected to be a certain degree of self-restraint and moral probity. You can't substitute regulations for them, and you can't worry about whether or not they're going to be enforced in the future. The heart of the matter is that the integrity, the intelligence, the morality of these elites have now been called into question, empirically because of their failure to operate, but also the way they operated. And no one at this point is certain that they can resurrect themselves or have new leadership enforced. And this is leading to a deep moral crisis. But it's not just confined to England, it's not confined to Europe, it's not confined to the United States. It's not even most deeply felt in the United States. It's in China as well and in other countries. The issue is, who are these people who are running things? What gives them the right to do so? And if that right does not somehow flow from competence, what does it flow from? So we have a crisis, I think, not in corruption, but of sheer incompetence and indifference to incompetence. And that is something that is not necessarily unmanageable, but it's certainly not a question of getting better regulations.
George, thank you. And you can read Dr. Friedman's article, Global Economic Downturn, A Crisis of Political Economy, on our web at www.stratfor.com. Thanks for being with us today. Until the next time, goodbye.
Well, I've often blamed the Federal Reserve for the crisis which led to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac going bust, and also to Lehman Brothers. And I'm going to be as forthright as I can about Lehman Brothers and the truth behind what happened with Lehman Brothers as is possible. The question that George Friedman asked was, what do the elites base their rule on? Well, if you're talking about the financial elites, it's their competence. If you're talking about the political elites, it's their democratic legitimacy. But if we're talking about feudalistic crime families such as the Bin Ladens, the Saudis and the people who run the Exxon oil company, who threatened Hank Paulson, the US Treasury chief, to not support Lehman Brothers, then we're talking about pure fear. It's only fear that dominates. Now, the family that runs Exxon are ultra-conservatives, as I've said before, and after Oslo, I just could not say anything about these people anymore. They have to be directly confronted. There has to be a campaign against them. So my comments are completely separate from George Friedman's. But the fact that they did that and threatened that man meant that there could be no further funding from the Federal Reserve to the Lehman Brothers. And that's what caused the collapse. People stopped Lehman Brothers trading and Lehman Brothers collapsed. Now, the Federal Reserve could have as much as I criticise the Federal Reserve for overinflating their economy in a nationalistic way and exporting their inflation to Europe, Europe probably could have handled the inflation. But the increase of inflation could have got America out of a recession despite the fact that the housing market problem could have been solved with a few or around $100 billion worth of funding by the Fed to liquidate toxic assets and draw out all those toxic assets for the Fed to put it into one bank and then slowly liquidate those assets, toxic assets and toxic mortgages, and to recouple all those mortgages with regulation, with the regulations that meant that they would be insured. Now, as George Freeman said, it is a crisis of unenforcement of regulations as well. And of course, because Paulson, the US Treasury chief, was threatened, and this has caused problems for other major elites. It's caused problems for the legitimate elite in the demos, the financial and political elites, the governments who people believe do run things, and it's also created problems for the university system, which in effect does run most of the social democracies in the Western world, including the United States and the EU and England. And so in that sense it's an alliance between England, the United States and Europe, principally between England and Germany and France through the university systems. And also it's caused problem Exxon by threatening the economy of Exxon and Halliburton, which many people call, or they call themselves, the New World Order, have threatened the economic and military and security and prosperity of the other major factions in the world. The other factions of what I would call feudalistic crime families, but there are factions of feudalistic crime families who are pro-Western and pro-democratic, even though they engage in what would be called crime, if they did not term it to be legal. There is simply a two-tier system of legality going on throughout the world, where some actions are considered legal because the crime factions consider them to be necessary. So in a sense, it's like the Mexican cartels and the Italian mafia gaining power in their countries and then saying that their actions were legal. Of course, they're not legal in any moral sense of the word, but that in legal terms they are legal, because there must be somebody who holds on to power, and that's the way that they think. There must be some kind of feudalistic system where people are owned, and that's the problem. If you do not have true democracy, which is limited by the rule of law, then you can have these kind of problems arise, and they arose through the oil and gold standards, as oil became the predominant currency because it was the method by which all production was fueled, and also the link between gold, which made a hierarchy of money in the gold standard system. This created several problems for legitimate governments who were controlled at the time by a direct power of, say, in the British Empire's case, the UK Parliament or the Great British Parliament from Westminster, and Westminster's sovereignty was absolute because of the rule of law, and Westminster operated as a court in many ways.